No.
1, 2, 3. My name is Anna Brandel. Today's date is April 13th, 2021. The time is 1:02. This interview is being virtually conducted and recorded. I am interviewing Lee Murry, who was born on June 22nd, 1933 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and served in the Korean War between 1952 and 1954. Lee was a sergeant in the Army and served in a fire direction center. This interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. Now, Lee, can you tell me what you were doing before you entered the service?
I was just out of high school and I turned 19 right after graduation. And nobody would hire me because I was draftable. They were afraid I'd start the job and I'd be drafted right away. So I wasn't doing much.
And then were you drafted into service or did you enlist?
Yes, I was.
You were drafted?
Yes.
What was the draft like at the time?
I beg your pardon?
What was the draft like at the time?
Well, it was pretty much at 18, you registered for the draft. And after that, you were just in limbo waiting to be called. You got a letter from your friends and neighbors. They have selected you. So when I got home, I got rid of all my friends and relatives, and I moved away from my neighbors.
And could you tell me a little bit about your early weeks of training and what it was like to adapt to military life?
It was very difficult. You were at home all those years and now you left and you were basically all alone, away from the family. So it was quite an adjustment.
Yeah, and what was the early weeks of training like?
It was like it was a long day. You got up like 5 o'clock in the morning and went out and did your training. And it was a long day and it was almost as bad as pulling KP, kitchen police, where you were doing work in the mess hall. And that was a long day because you started like 5 o'clock in the morning and you went till about 9 o'clock at night.
And can you tell me a little bit about some of the other like jobs or different training things you would have to do during that time?
Well, the Army took care of the training and they got as much training in 8 weeks. After 8 weeks, you went to an advanced training for another 8 weeks. So you had 16 weeks of training.
And were those training dates in the same place or where were you during your training?
I was down in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And it was unusual weather, especially in the wintertime. It wasn't that cold, but in the mornings, they had water nearby your bunk and it would be froze. And at noon, you'd be out in a t-shirt.
Wow. And after you finished your training, where did you end up going?
They flew us advance party to Seattle, Washington. And that's where we eventually left on ship for Korea.
And you said you traveled on ship to Korea. Can you tell me a little bit about what life was like on the troop transport ship?
I can. It was off to a miserable start because we got on the ship and as it pulled away from the harbor, they played Easter parade. It was Easter that coming up in a couple days and there was not a dry eye on that ship. So 4 days out, we ran into a storm and nobody on that ship avoided being sick. So, and then it was 28 days. And then we stopped at Yokohama, Japan to refuel, to go around Japan to the harbor of Korea.
And what did you do on the ship to keep busy? Like, did you have to do any jobs or anything?
We were apprentices through the Navy people. We did all their work. We were all buck privates, and we had no say-so. We did what we were told.
What was some of the things that you had to do?
Oh, mop the floor, mop the deck, clean this, clean that. We cleaned everything on that ship.
And for other times when you weren't working, what were your living quarters like?
We lived in bunks, 5 high. A bunk is a piece of canvas, and I managed to stay near the top. I had to be careful because it was a long way down.
I can imagine so. And when you got to Korea, what was your form of transportation there?
They loaded us onto a train, and we moved from the harbor of Incheon to go to the northern part of Korea.
And what were your living conditions like while you were in Korea?
Horrible. Well, we were issued sleeping bags. We slept in with a zipper on, and we slept in those. And then come winter time, they came in with winter sleeping bags. So it was a rough adjustment. And it was cold in the wintertime, 30, 35 below. And we lost a lot of veterans to frostbite.
And while you were in those sleeping bags, was there any other like shelter around you, or were you solely had the sleeping bag?
No, it was just regular outdoor. And then sometimes we moved from front to front, and we got to live into a bunker made totally on the side of a hill and surrounded by sandbags. And the big difference there was a lot warmer.
And while you were in Korea, did you have any interaction with the locals, either children or adults?
We had communication with the children. Children 8 to 10 years old, we use them for running errands and doing this, doing that. And I don't know if I should say so, but they were like our houseboy. They cleaned our clothes. We only had 2 sets of clothes, but nearby creeks, they take our clothes and scrub them down in the creek. And they did the cleanup of our sleeping area. And we paid them about $2 a week or $1 a week, depending on how good they were. Money at that time was very big because $1 was compared to 600 of their Korean won, WHAN. So.
Yeah, so as far as adults in Korea, when adult locals, did you have any communication with them at all?
None whatsoever.
Was there like a big language barrier that caused that, or was it a different reason for not having interaction?
When we were there and mingled, it was like half American and half Korean. It was a GI talk communicating with them. So we had a universal GI language.
And if you or someone else wanted to communicate with anybody back home in the States, how would you do so?
By letter. We were allowed to send mail and no postage. You didn't have to pay for stamps or buy stamps or anything. Everything was free mail. But it usually took about 10 days minimum for a letter to arrive to them or to us.
And what was your role while you were serving in Korea?
Well, after a month or so, I was transferred into the fire direction center of a heavy mortar company. The mortars would, with understanding of Korea being mostly hills, mortars were used to fly mortar charges over the hills. And I was in with maps, and they would radio us from the tops of the hills. We had our field observer on top of hills facing the enemy, and they would give us the information, the location, and we would read it on the map, and we would give directions to the mortar people how much, what they called charges that had the mortar shells go over these hills, and they were dependent on charges. So we did all that with our maps and radio.
And did you have a specific job in the Fire Direction Center?
That was my job, reading the map and giving the information over the radio.
Okay. And then while you were in Korea, did you travel or serve anywhere else?
Not really. Every 4 months, we got a week leave. And then we would usually take that week to go to Japan for relaxation.
What were some of the things that you guys enjoyed doing while you were in Japan on your leave?
Just relaxing, and Japan was very nice. The people were so hospitable. They treated us very well.
And was there anything in Japan that like you got to like see, or was there something that like is really memorable for you?
Not really. First time I was in Tokyo, and that was like a person from Pewaukee or Sussex going into Chicago. It was humongous. Tokyo, they would drive 60 miles an hour downtown, and it was like they had no brakes. They just blew the horn. Everybody get out of the way. But Tokyo was really huge, so never got to see that much of it.
Yeah, and how many times did you get to go to Japan?
3.
3? And did you go to Tokyo every single time?
No. Second time I went to a resort, and that was just strictly relaxation. The other time I went to Yokohama, which I really enjoyed. I thought Yokohama was one of the better places to go. Could see, and it was primitive. They were digging holes and putting in like telephone poles, and they used like 2 horses to pull a rope, pulling that telephone post upright. So that's how they did. And that was like early to mid 50s.
And how long did you end up staying in Korea?
A total of 16 months.
And when you were on your way back from Korea, what was the troop transport ship like? Like, was the journey
It was
different?
wonderful. It was wonderful because we were all non-commissioned officers, corporals, sergeants, and we did nothing. We just laid around on the deck and watched the Navy do all the work. We got back our time.
I'm sure, because as you mentioned before, correct, you on the way there you had to work a lot, so then on the way back you relaxed.
Very much so. In fact, it was a very memorable trip because we took the southern route, right, and we passed Hawaii, and the temperature of the water was 80 degrees. So that I remember. But
And did you take a different route on the way there?
the northern route from Seattle, and on the way back, we landed in California.
Okay. And was there similar living styles on the troop transport ship on the way back, besides like not having to do a lot of different jobs and
They
stuff?
were very much the same. Living conditions. They were called troop ships, and they were very crude.
And after you got back from serving, what did you spend your time doing?
Relaxing. I was offered a job the first week and I said no. I had to relax, and about a month later, I went and I accepted the offer for a job.
And what was that job that you accepted?
The start of 25 years in the printing field. I took that up in high school. I attended boys technical high school in Milwaukee, and I learned the printing trade, and I went into printing and I lasted 25 years. And then the computers came in and took over.
And then after you worked with the printing business for 25 years, what else did you go on to do?
I was very active and intrigued with veteran organizations. And the Veterans of Foreign Wars offered me a job at the Veterans Administration as a service officer. And we represented veterans with their cases, their appeals. We took care of their families. They had problems. We helped them out. So it was one of the things I always made mention. It was a wonderful job because every morning going to work, I knew I was going to help somebody.
That's amazing. And what was it like to transition back into civilian life after serving in Korea?
It was very different, unusual, because you had lost all your contacts, and then my family moved from mid-city Milwaukee to western Milwaukee, and it was new neighbors and new friends.
Yeah, so it was almost like starting over in a way.
Correct.
Was there anybody else in your family that also served?
I beg your pardon?
Was there anybody else in your family who also served?
My brother, my older brother, was in World War II, and he was in the Battle of the Bulge. Received 2 Bronze Stars. So I was very proud of him.
That sounds amazing. What were some life lessons, so to say, that you learned from your military service?
How to take care of yourself, how to live alone, and just take care of yourself.
Yeah, were there any like skills or anything that you picked up on while you were in Korea?
Skills, you didn't learn much in Korea except taking care of yourself. It was called taking care of number one. But you learned how to be safe.
Yeah. And then previous to our interview, I heard that you were able to go on the honor flight. Could you tell me a
Yes.
little bit about your experience with that?
It was very honorable. The honor flight was very well organized, and I couldn't say enough good things about them. They were just exceptional. It started off on the right foot because we had 3 breakfasts. We left the house like 4 o'clock in the morning to get to Billy Mitchell Field, and they had breakfast waiting for us. We left by airplane. We received another breakfast on the plane. And we arrived in Washington, D.C., and they had another breakfast waiting for us. So that was one of the memorable things, having 3 breakfasts that morning. And we left Milwaukee about 5 o'clock in the morning, and we returned at about 6 o'clock. So, but going there, arriving there, like I said, it was very organized. We went by bus. We had 2 buses, and our crew on the plane was made up of mostly Korean. We had like 4 people from World War II, and then we had about 4 or 5 Vietnam veterans. So we were the majority out of the 200. But we went, saw all the memorials, and the ones that stand out memorable was the Vietnam Wall, the Korean Wall, and they were at that time just completed World War II memorial. So that was very interesting. And then they took us to a bunch of other monuments. And one I had never heard of was the FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, over 7 acres for that memorial.
Wow. And did you have anybody like in your family go with you on the honor flight?
You have to supply a guardian, which has to be under 65. At that time, it was 65. So I took my daughter. My wife was too old to be a guardian. And all the Korean veterans in World War II were put in wheelchairs. So they had to push us around. That was the guardian's job, pushing the wheelchairs.
I imagine, because how long were your days while you were on the honor flight?
How long was the day?
Yeah, like was there a certain schedule that you had to follow?
Oh, they kept us on schedule. It was like from 6:30 in the morning until like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we went back to the airport. Then they sent us back. And at the airport, both airports, Washington, D.C., it was a military farewell. And you had all the active troops stand there at attention and saluted us as we got on the plane. And they had the same thing in Milwaukee when we got off the plane. Military escorts at the airport, salutes, very memorable.
And what do you consider to be your most important contribution during your service?
Being able to fulfill my assignments, being able to get around while you're trying to stay safe, and just taking care of number one.
Yeah, and did you get to reunite or meet up with anybody that you served with once you got back home?
Just one person, and he was from my high school days, and we still see each other, or up until his death. Yeah.
Yeah, and how did your service change your view on the world?
became a very aware of problems, customs of other countries. In fact, while I was in Korea, I spent a week with Thailanders, and they're very short people, but they have very good food. Didn't know what I was eating, but it was very good. And very happy people.
Yeah. Did you did your daily life change at all? Like how you went about your life after you got back?
Well, I didn't have to worry about mom and dad. I could take care of myself.
And as you say that, did you end up living by yourself once you got back?
No, I lived with mom and dad for up until the time I got married.
Okay. I would like to thank you for telling me all about your service. I'm so glad that I was able to hear your story and learn a lot about the Korean War and about your story personally. At this time, I'm going to say a closing statement. So in closing, this has been the interview of Lee Murry regarding his service during the Korean War. My name is Anna Brandel. The time is 1:29. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and most importantly, thank you for your service.
Anna, it's been my pleasure. And with that last name of Brandel, was there an older, probably early 90s, by the name of Willie Brandel? I played a lot of ball with a Willie Brandel.
Not that I am aware of, but
Okay.
maybe.
He probably would have been your great grandfather.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is Mr. Yuskis around?
Yeah, he's outside in the